I earned a PhD from Princeton University in biochemistry and molecular biology after carrying a double major in math and music at UC Berkeley. However, being an academic was not a dream that inspired energy in me. Success on that path was likely, and my life would have been relatively secure. Why couldn't I just accept that as my fate? That would have been both rational and reasonable. I would have met a lot of other people's expectations for me, but I felt I needed something more, and it took a lifetime to discover what more would mean. A few years in the immunodiagnostics industry, a couple of decades as a venture capitalist in Asia and in Silicon Valley, a decade on the startup side, and a decade teaching entrepreneurship at the university level in Peking University in China, Hong Kong UST, and at UC Berkeley. So one common theme through all these activities was a commitment to be an investor in human capital. So the challenge I present myself every day is, how can I inspire others to believe they can change the world for the better? All right, what does it mean to make unreasonable choices in life? The single most valuable lesson that I have been learning all my life is the importance of asking questions. You all heard Greg Lee mention that. How else can you grow as your own person, right? Preschool children drive their parents crazy by constantly asking why and how. Wise parents guide their children to find their own paths to learning, instead of simply giving them quick answers to their questions. As a child, I was blessed that my parents gave me that gift. Today, I am still searching for better questions for myself and for others. I am never satisfied with answers because that is not my objective. Each question begets another question as I probe more deeply. I want to keep asking questions until all I can find are challenges and unknowns. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Entrepreneurism is a lifestyle choice, a commitment to one's true self. Is this a rational choice? I don't think so. Does that mean it is also an unreasonable choice? Not necessarily. So what's the difference? When you are behaving rationally, you think logically and often look for established, practical steps to take. A professional career choice, such as medicine, law, or accounting, typically leads to a predictable path of work that can be stimulating and rewarding financially. This is very typical here in Hong Kong. So what makes a path predictable? Other people have already explored and defined many possibilities, so the work is structured and a supporting ecosystem is already in place. Working in this kind of environment means fitting into boxes that have been defined by other people. You get paid by the piece or by the hour, pretty much as any factory worker, even if you are a so-called white-collar or knowledge worker. Is this how you want your efforts to be recognized and appreciated? Isn't it interesting that the fear associated with risk depends on your point of view? If you are a skilled mountain climber, you might believe that aspiring to climb Mount Everest is a risk worth taking. For someone who is afraid of heights, like me, the risk is totally unacceptable. I'll be happy to watch you from the base camp. When you think of your future work life, what kinds of risks will you be ready to accept? The point of view shown in this slide is, when you are an employee working for a company, you actually have very little control over your future, the kind of work you will do, how long you will be employed. In this era of exponential change in technology and economics, when will your skills be deemed obsolete? What will you do when you see that day approaching? no employer is going to care about your future more than you can. When you are an entrepreneur, you actually have much more power to influence the direction and achievements that may be possible for you. The only limitations are self-imposed. How much do you value the capacity to determine the path of your growth? These are all very recognizable faces, right? On the left, that's Jeff Bezos, middle is Richard Branson, and this is Elon Musk. These are arguably among the most famous space pioneers and entrepreneurs today. It's no coincidence that they are all billionaires who have been extremely successful as innovators in a variety of industry areas. If you have watched any video interviews, you cannot fail to be impressed by their outsized personalities and persuasive charm. Most of us cannot hope to imitate their success, but we can learn from the challenges they faced. Entrepreneurs seek challenges because this is how they become stronger, happier with themselves. They feel driven to fulfill some aspects of themselves. Where others see problems and difficulties, they see opportunities for change. They want to contribute to change in small ways or big ways. They constantly look for inspiration and want to inspire hope for a better future. So where do entrepreneurs look for opportunities? In the real world of business, competition is fierce in all industries and all markets. Entrepreneurs are not afraid of competition, but they strive to develop some strengths that are unique and a significant barrier to competitors. They want to do what other people have not yet been able to do. That means chasing or developing new markets, creating new demand, and offerings that will change the lives of millions of people. For entrepreneurs and change agents, what makes space and space technologies an area worth exploring? That's what this conference is all about, and you've already heard many great presentations about that. Of course, there are many perspectives to consider. Exploration of space is not a new activity. Rockets as weapons of war were developed about 80 years ago during World War II. Yuri Gagarin, the Soviet cosmonaut, was the first human to circle the globe, and that was more than 60 years ago. Of course, imaginary adventures have been the subject of innumerable science fiction stories and films forever. I grew up myself feeling awestruck by these accomplishments. So what's special about space? The prime characteristic of any new opportunity is adventuring into the unknown. How exciting is it to discover, to be the first person to realize an insight or create an invention? Reasonable people might feel that any opportunities related to space are too uncertain and too far out in the future. A reasonable question is, how will the challenges of space relate to our lives today? When you see the exponential growth in diverse technologies, computers, microchips, sensors, robotics, communications, energy, medicine, aviation, mobility, cars and trucks, does that trigger in your mind a connection to space exploration? Did you know that the latest cell phones, everyone has a new iPhone or Android, did you know the latest cell phones are more powerful than the computers that were used in the first moon landing? Consider our most basic necessities: food, clothing, shelter, energy, water, even air. Most of space is vacuum, literally empty space with nothing in it, except for occasional bits of rock and gases. Even if we could ship the resources and raw materials needed for a colony on Mars, what will we do when those supplies are consumed? Won't the challenge of how to maintain life require creative reimagination? Who is going to create these leaps of imagination? Are engineers the only ones with the capabilities? Obviously not. Are scientists in general the only ones who will contribute to this vision of a future world? What about family life, education, raising children, providing all the services and conveniences we are accustomed to? All, absolutely all aspects of terrestrial life will be recreated in space. We can only hope that we can reduce the negative and undesirable aspects. After some reflection, maybe a better question is, what aspect of our lives will not be affected in the very near future by how we think about space? What do we know about unknowns? Problems that need to be solved are opportunities for entrepreneurism, because entrepreneurs are first and foremost problem solvers. When a pain point is significant enough, there will be people willing to pay for a solution. This is one thing we do know for sure. So how much risk is unreasonable? Isn't space exploration very risky? Aren't there too many unknowns? Isn't too much capital required? These observations are all true. We are hardwired as human beings to be alert to danger and risk. Society, and especially media sources, reinforce our fear because that is an effective business practice to get attention. Entrepreneurship is a skill that must be learned, even by people who show signs of talent. How and where can one find this education? When I was teaching at HKUST, it was critical to emphasize to students, faculty, and administration that entrepreneurship is most effectively learned by doing, not from lectures, books, or videos. The brain needs to be stimulated to form new neural connections, not just reinforce the intellectual and analytical pathways that have already been trained. These new connections represent experiences that include emotional responses, physical activities, as well as conscious thought. So what distinguishes entrepreneurial talent is, in fact, the drive to learn from direct experience. Successful entrepreneurs often were not distinguished scholars in school. The issue of success is not one of intelligence or even working hard. Motivation, intent, and focus are different for entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs literally see the world through a different set of lenses. So what I wanted to suggest to people attending this conference is to think about space and space technologies, the challenges of space, kind of like a filter, right? It's something that shades the way you perceive pretty much everything. And then when you look through this filter, then you look toward what is going to make sense to you. And it will look different, just as you would with a different colored filter on a camera. We often talk about thinking out of the box as a metaphor for being creative and innovative. So how can we find or create opportunities where the level of risk is actually reasonable, at least from the perspective of an entrepreneur? This is a much better question than asking, what path should I take to be successful? Unreasonable entrepreneurs are driven by curiosity as much as by ambition or greed. What is curiosity but a drive to ask basic questions? Why, how, what if? Why are existing processes inefficient or inadequate? How can products or services be improved? to provide higher quality, preferably at lower cost? What if things we used to believe to be impossible might now be possible, thanks to the invention of new technologies? The intent of asking is, of course, to explore for possible answers. At a deeper level of personal growth, while we are trying to gather more data, of even greater value is finding insights that inform our intuition. Our brains are hardwired to perceive patterns, just like AI, no matter how incomplete the data set might be. This is how intuition works, often without our understanding why or how. Intuition is often not trusted by reasonable people who prefer to trust analysis, especially with numbers and calculations. So intuition is a critical skill that entrepreneurs must develop because every day they are required to make decisions without having as much data as they would like to have in order to make an intelligent decision. The downside of intuition is that it's not 100% correct all the time. With practice, though, our ability will improve. Intuition informs creativity and can be a source of inspiration. So think of intuition as a set of keys that might unlock the box you find yourself in. You may have to try several different keys before you find one that opens a door or window. Risk assessment, however, does need a more analytical approach. While you have little control over your success, you absolutely have a lot of control over the level of risk in your undertakings because you get to decide what you are going to do. The intent of this slide is to show that we need courage to move forward. Fear is a normal part of our psyche and is a protective mechanism Mother Nature devised for us a very long time ago. As intelligent, thinking beings, we are constantly challenged to balance opposite characteristics of our psyche. Courage is not the absence of fear. Rather, it is the ability to persist, to move ahead despite warning signs that trigger heightened awareness, i.e. fear. By definition, our comfort zone is where we feel less fear. So a question that I challenge my students in my classes and entrepreneurs is, what is at the boundary of your personal comfort zone? Okay? Questions, fears, pressure from external sources such as parents or employers. Why do most people stay within their comfort zone? What inspires those who seek greater challenges? Courage and persistence give you the strength to climb out of a box. You quickly discover that to achieve a big ambition, diverse talents are needed. So you should make lots of friends to build positive feedback loops. What can be a more powerful way to mitigate risk than to be part of a strong team? Teamwork is also a test of leadership for each and every member of the team. Unreasonable entrepreneurs have the courage to embrace a bold vision of what might be possible because they believe the journey will be a positive experience, regardless whether their original goal is met or not. Reasonable people, i.e. risk-averse, practical people, will not become entrepreneurs. There's nothing wrong with that choice. They are simply not meant to go on that path. Only a very small percentage of people actually thrive on the entrepreneurial journey. Entrepreneurs need non-entrepreneurs around them too, right? To provide other services, to manage legal, administrative issues, and of course to be customers. Unreasonable people need reasonable people just as much as reasonable people need unreasonable people in the society. So that's what makes the world go round. So this is a question also that I kind of throw out, particularly to young entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs. So why are we here? In the immediate context of this conference, after this event, what next steps are called for? What would make a difference in your life? How do you want to evolve, to grow? The answer is actually very simple and starts with taking action. Make a plan of activities that you can start tonight. Make lists of questions to challenge yourselves, starting with, what energizes me? What kinds of people do I want to surround myself with, to build something with? OASA's mission is to build an ecosystem, this infrastructure of resources that can be the foundation for the next generations as space exploration becomes commonplace. This is an exciting vision already shared by many people in different countries around the world, as you have seen this morning. So what are we doing here in Hong Kong? No, what we are doing here in Hong Kong will have global repercussions. Are we, all of us, ready to take a leadership role? This is the challenge that Dr. G has presented to everyone. Stargazing. I don't know what this represents. But I want to leave you all with a few questions. What stimulates, you're asking yourself here, what stimulates my imagination? Obviously. What encourages me to be eager to learn? What gives me hope for the future? And so the last word I want to leave you with is, go ahead and dream. You don't need permission to dream unreasonable dreams. Thank you for your attention.
Hello. At this time, I would like to introduce our panel moderator, Dr. Ranu Bhatia. Dr. Bhatia has a background in finance, fintech, and healthcare sector. She's also a licensed physician. She's a council member of OASA and currently a chairperson of the Listening Committee of the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong. Dr. Bhatia?
Oh, the light? Okay. Well, I think Po Chi, we've already had an introduction to, so I think I might skip. But let me start with Paul. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, so thanks, Reno. I have some quite familiar faces here, so quite a number of friends. My name is Paul Wang. I'm the director of the Techno Entrepreneurship Core of the University of Hong Kong. So to make it simple, our office is a newly established entrepreneurship center of the university, trying to help all the students, graduates, professors to make their dreams come true. So basically, that's a little bit about me. And before I joining Hong Kong U, I was with Poly for quite almost a decade, also doing the similar stuff and helping a lot of startups. Luckily, I had the opportunity to witness several unicorns that are emerging out of those several thousand entrepreneurs in this process. So actually, I learned quite a lot from them instead of they learned from me. So that's basically a bit about myself. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Po Chi, do you want to add another couple of words? Wu-Shan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. I'm a partner at Fresco Capital. My actual name that my parents gave me is for Zonfar Zehni. It comes from Tajikistan, where I was born, but lived mostly outside of Tajikistan, in places like Yemen, Sweden, Russia, the US, and with great fortune for the past decade or so, I have been here in Hong Kong. I started on this unreasonable path of entrepreneurship completely by accident. I couldn't get employed after my degree in HKU. Go figure why. We'll probably...
No comment on HKU. Should have gone to PolyU, clearly.
But luck would have it that I had a few good friends who decided to invest into my newly founded company, and I was able to, choose a path in entrepreneurship. Fast forward a few years, that failed, just like my attempts to get a degree, education, work after my degree. But as luck would have it, one more time, a few of my friends just started a new fund called Fresco Capital, and I quote my friend. He said, "You were a pretty shitty entrepreneur. Hopefully, you'll be a better investor because you can tell the founders what not to do." And fast forward, a decade after that, we have grown the portfolio to over, 60 companies. We've done over 100 investments now globally. We have raised multiple funds, and we've been, having had the privilege of investing into, really, really unreasonably amazing founders and teams throughout this year. So hopefully I can share a couple of those stories today and, partake in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't actually going to say anything about myself, but Po Chi said something that sort of struck me, which is the part curiosity plays and the desire to sort of learn and how that changes and is a big part of not just entrepreneurship, but how we live our lives. But it is that sort of challenge. For myself, I grew up in London, and I did have a very practical and a very rational path to my life. I became a doctor, and that is what one should do, and the path is very clear. Probability, risk are all defined, and but that sort of desire to be curious, to kind of think what else is out there, because you make these decisions when you're very young and you haven't had that opportunity to explore a lot of things. So I took myself off and got another degree, and before I knew it, I was at Goldman Sachs. Now this is from having been a public doctor in the NHS in the UK doing cardiology, which is my specialty. So here I am now, I wasn't sure what I was doing at Goldman, but it certainly wasn't. Their sense of an emergency was very different from mine. Emergency to me was saving a life, and emergency to them was doing another spreadsheet with a 5% increase in revenue. But, and fast forward, and I've sort of had this journey of basically being curious. I've started a medical company. I've been in fintech, started a fintech accelerator where I've had a chance to see a lot of young entrepreneurs come. And so along the way, I've sort of formed a few thoughts, perhaps, which are more to do with perhaps entrepreneurship comes at a later stage in life as well, when you actually understand the business world out there, rather than simply saying, I've got a great idea, I'm just going to go for it. So let me start by asking, Hong Kong people are known as very practical, very pragmatic, very rational, given life here. Should we be asking them to be such entrepreneurs, or should we think to them, get some experience in life first, figure out what you might really have a passion for, and then try? Can I ask Paul, is that something you might tell your students?
Yeah, so that's a constant question we got from our students is usually that's when should I start? When should I start to do a startup? Should I start right after graduation, or even in the middle of the study, or after a few years of work experience? So we also observe that for a period of time. So according to our experience, several most outstanding entrepreneurs actually just do the startup right after their graduation. So there are a couple of reasons for that, but they basically show their talents in the very beginning, and actually they're very curious, they're fast learners, and I definitely very much agree with what Po Chi said. Is entrepreneurship is basically by doing. You have to really do it. You just can't just wait for 3, 4, 5 years and then probably got some idea and then jump on it. There's another usual pathways we see, observe, but I see the great entrepreneurs as sort of like a very bold, very daring young people. And the good thing about that is because this few young entrepreneurs actually failed in their first venture. They usually fail in first venture.
Tell me about it.
But they will learn very quickly and adapt and start another one. They came back again with what they learned in their first 3 to 4 years, and then be much better the next time. So usually the second or third one will just fly. So that's what I just have observed. But for those more pragmatic ones, yes, they also stand a chance. But when people get older and get to a certain stage, you have different burdens coming in. It's much harder. Actually, I also observed that it's even harder. We had an entrepreneur actually sold 2 apartments because he had a decent job in Samsung for like 10 years or something. And he saw some opportunity and jumped out and sold 2 houses, apartments in Hong Kong, and started a company. And he also got some investment, but that's not enough. And now he's still struggling. I'm still wondering whether he is regretting that his decision to sell his apartments to do that. So I think it's really about the spirit and the nature and the personal quality of the entrepreneurs to say that's whether this should be in the right timing or not. And also definitely I have to say that the Hong Kong students needs to be more, I always encourage them to be dream big and just try. Especially, of course, I need to disclaim that we usually encourage well, if their family doesn't account on them to be the bread owner, go ahead and do some startup in your first few years. But if that's not the case, okay, you just get a job, feed your family first. Yeah.
On that point about risk, i.e. get a job first, do you think in Hong Kong in particular, in Silicon Valley, Po Chi and Fu-Shan, I have the impression that failing is okay. Failing is okay. The question is, what did you learn from it? How will you change something to it? And maybe 2, 3, 4 failures are perfectly fine. Now, I know that in Europe, failure is far less acceptable. And the question I have is, what is it like in Hong Kong? We say, okay, failure, but how easy it is to recover from that? How will venture capital, how will seed capital, how will all of these other people view your failures?
Sure.
That's a lucky example.
Thank you
right?
for highlighting. No, it's perfectly fine. I could go on for a very long time on that topic. I think on just the first question that Paul addressed on entrepreneurship, when is the right time? I don't think there's like a time for it. I think it's more of a state of mind, in my personal belief, right? It's a state of mind. Whether you graduated university and got a job in Goldman Sachs. Your mind is always curious. You're always asking questions. You're always trying to maximize your output, your learning, your input, right? And so it doesn't matter whether you graduated HKU, went into Goldman, doesn't mean you're not an entrepreneur, because you're trying to probably create value within Goldman, right? But at some point, very quickly, you're going to realize Goldman or whatever company has put a box around you. And that's when you start to feel restricted. And usually what happens with entrepreneurs, because of their state of mind, they don't like being restricted, because Goldman is telling you, or whatever company, sorry I'm using Goldman, my bad if anybody's in Goldman here, they're saying, stop asking so many questions, right? And that's when your state of mind is now in conflict with the box that was surrounded by you. So whether it's one corporation versus another corporation or the third corporation, that state of mind can never go away for an entrepreneur, right? And that's what I feel and entrepreneurship is about. So it might be right after graduation. It might be 10 years later. But at some point, you're going to be like, I need to get out of this box because I still have so many more questions to ask, right? So that's on entrepreneurship. On failure, I think there's two things on failure. I think there's perception of failure, and then there's actual failure, right? In Hong Kong, we fear the perception of failure. So it's not us failing, it's what others believe about our failure, right? So going back to the corporate world, if we get fired from a corporate job, is that a failure, or is that not my failure because the company fired me, right? So we can disassociate ourselves with the blame, i.e. with the failure of no longer being employed, right? So I can go back to my parents or my family and say, oh yeah, Goldman fired me, right? As opposed to if I have my own company and we couldn't succeed or whatever happened, then that failure is squarely on my shoulders, right? So this association of failure is the perception that we have around it, right? That's my first take. Second, and I'm really sorry to hog the mic, one of the most interesting studies that I read was entrepreneurial, like startup rates in immigrant heavy cities, right? And this was specifically in China. Who knows what is the most entrepreneurial or startup friendly city in China? You can shout. Hangzhou. That's one very good example, but not correct answer. Wenzhou, also very good, also incorrect.
This is not giving them failure.
Shenzhen, there we go, right? Ask the academia. Shenzhen has the highest rate of startups created, and coincidentally also has the highest immigrant count, right? So going back to the perception of failure, when you are an immigrant, you have already gotten comfortable with the fact of failure is okay, and also probably more practically, you're away from family, so they can't perceive your failure. Right? So why did I in Hong Kong, being from Tajikistan, think it's okay to go start my own company and fail at it because my parents weren't there to tell me, 𝗏𝗏, what are you doing? Go get a job. Right? So it's anecdotal, but I do think there is evidence behind what we perceive and understand as failure, and therefore there are certain environments that will allow us to be more creative, ask more questions, think outside of the box, as opposed to, other environments. And I apologize for hogging the mic.
On that one, I think the immigrant question is interesting because at the end of the day, not everyone leaves their hometown to go somewhere else. By that very definition, you're a risk taker because you've left something behind that is comfortable, that you know. You've gone to somewhere new. So you're already, as a risk taker, an ability to kind of move with the flow and figure out that I need this to survive. I think that is a big component of why immigrant population. I suppose that begs the question, is that why America has been so successful in entrepreneurship?
Oh, yeah, no doubt about that. At least in in California, the vast majority of the entrepreneurs are actually from outside of the country. And, many from India, many from China, and not so many from Europe, but really from all over. And I agree with what you're all saying about immigrants. It's not just the risk taking, that certainly is part of it, but it is really that desire to survive.
Yes.
You know, the absolute determination, whether you have family or not, or you know, it's not a question of how much you have. It's really, it is that sense. But I want to address the other comment about how failure is perceived in Silicon Valley, at least. And the real difference is that, especially in entrepreneurship, there are certain things that you only learn when you fail. You know, it's like the most effective learning tool is when you do something and then you learn, you really do learn from it. Unfortunately, our academic training doesn't work that way. We try to learn in a way as easily as possible without failing, right? We get good grades and all of that. But that's actually not as useful, not as productive learning for entrepreneurship. So that's actually why. You have to do it, you have to experience it, and then, of course, you fail because you don't know enough, and that's just normal.
I mean, I'd like to ask one question. People talk a lot about Israel and the success of their entrepreneurs, and being a small country, they've done very well. So a question that I have is, you know, do you see differences between entrepreneurs in different countries? I'm very curious to know, you know, does that sort of, how much of a part that plays in that, their success or failures?
Well, from my personal experience with 2 universities, and also mostly in Hong Kong, we actually observe that every time we have some kind of entrepreneurship activities, actually there are 2 main bodies of students actually participating. One is from Chinese mainland, the other is the foreign students. Disproportionately from the student body. So yes, we were quite curious about that. And also we had some conversation with the investors because they invest both in Hong Kong and Shenzhen and also the other parts of the world. So their general feeling is that I think for us, we are more concerned about the local Hong Kong students actually have sort of developed a tunnel vision because very early on, probably even in the middle school, something like that. So they basically, there are a lot of attentions, there are ideas. Actually, they are brilliant. They have very good ideas, but early on, they set their minds on the local market, but they didn't really look beyond that. So I think this is something we observed, and well, also had the chance to visit Singapore and also Israel. Well, they're more outgoing. Actually, in the beginning, all the entrepreneurs are thinking about markets outside their home country, home place. So I think this is something that needs to be addressed locally, and also where there are different other characteristics of Singaporean entrepreneurs and the Australians, but that's sometimes the geopolitics and also the other market assessments, market access also play some roles.
For sure. I think there are some very clear similarities, and then there's some very clear differences. For context, we have invested in probably, let's see, Estonia, Italy, Spain, UK, US, Canada, Hong Kong. So we've seen a lot of different cultures and different founders. I think there is cultural nuance to each individual. So I'll give you an example. An Estonian founder is versus a US founder. An Estonian founder was pitching their business to me, right? And we were discussing their business. And the Estonian founder was more critical of their own business than I was, right? They were like, our churn is kind of high. The product needs a lot of work. We still need to do a lot of work on how we're going to build our user metrics. So they were just basically criticizing their business on my behalf, right? I was like, okay, cool. That was very interesting to me. And then in the US, there was a lot of founders who were kind of doing a little bit of the opposite, you know? Colloquially, we call it fake it till you make it, right? My business is great. We're the best in the world. We're going to change everything. Like, guys, you don't even have a product yet, right? So there is a cultural difference there. And that's perfectly fine. Both founders were very successful in both instances, which is, you know, quite interesting to observe. But that cultural difference is what stems from, I think, their normal, like, day-to-day culture. But what we saw very similar in both of them was their ability to continue to ask questions, right? So even though the US founder, you know, we're gonna change the world, and then he came back like, but how? What else can we do, right? Well, like, so they were very much willing to ask a lot of questions, but they had a different approach to it. So I think there is going to be a lot of similarities. There's going to be cultural differences, but the fundamentals of entrepreneurship, survivability, unwavering curiosity, and yeah, like passion for market are always going to be very consistent, in my view, across markets, but they will be delivered in a completely different package. And I think Hong Kong has that, just in a different package.
I'd just like to add a quick comment about Israel, because I've been studying this for a long time. I've been doing this kind of venture capital, and I've seen what different startup ecosystems can do. And of course, the entire ecosystem in Israel is very different than anywhere else in the world, and certainly very different from Hong Kong. But Hong Kong can learn some things. So for example, you probably know the Weizmann Institute. The Weizmann Institute is the premier research institute in Israel, and it is the single most successful institution in terms of royalties from IP generated from Weizmann. I don't know, it was a decade or even a couple decades ago, they're getting like $20 billion a year. By far the most successful institution in tech transfer. But that's because they made it an objective. They understood what it would take to create that kind of team, to create the technology itself. It's a graduate research institute, and you know, their government position is also very different in terms of the kinds of things that the government supports. And of course, the people go through military training, and then they get exposed to the practical necessities of the technology. So it's really, all of it is very different, but it is an ecosystem that works within their culture, and their culture also is very different again. But you know, I think that's what we all can learn from different cultures. It's not that there's any single right way or single best way to be an entrepreneur. It is a very individual matter. Of course, there are common characteristics, and I think that's what we can learn. But we can also learn from their differences and say, oh, if they do it that way, how do they still get, you know, a good outcome? Because you think, you know, intuitively you assume, well, it's not going to work, right? Because I don't understand it. But that's our fault, that we don't understand. We're not asking the right questions.
Thank you. I've been noticing and been asked a lot of times recently, on every list that's going around, there's a lot of Indian people who have become incredibly successful running all of these big organizations. And the question is always put, like, why is it that, you know, we haven't seen so many Chinese lead these organizations? And then the question comes, why is it that Indians in India haven't made these large companies? So when you said that there's a lot of Indian entrepreneurs that you're seeing in Silicon Valley, I'm wondering if this is part of a cycle that one goes through. When a population is successful in another country, they, you know, then they move away from getting the safe jobs within a corporation and then go on to the next journey of being able to take those extra risks and becoming entrepreneurs. Po Chi, is there something to that, or is it?
Well, I've been sort of chuckling at your comment because it's actually a sensitive issue for Asians in Silicon Valley.
Ignore that one.
No, you know, I'm half joking, but it is true that for CEO level, you know, founders who create companies and go on to continue to grow them as CEOs, Indians far surpass any other minority group, and particularly Chinese. So I have a much more simplistic interpretation of that, and it's their ability to communicate. They speak really well.
That's what I think.
Yeah,
I think it's
they
the language,
really know how to do it.
The
Oh yeah,
language.
yeah. No, they understand that very well, and of course, you know, all of these founders are really quite intelligent people, and otherwise they can't do it either. But the ability to communicate is a huge distinction. And I think they also don't come from as limited a background. And you talked about tunnel vision. You know, Chinese students are really very good in school because they have tunnel vision. They just say, I'm going to excel in the math and the engineering and whatever. And that turns out to be a liability as an entrepreneur. And the first liability is you don't socialize enough. So you don't learn how to communicate in a social context, and you're not exposed enough to the more high level, let's call it professional types of interaction. And the Indians are much more open about that and less self-conscious. So they'll just go, you know, prattling on, and they learn very quickly how to be effective in that context.
But a lot of those same students who do so exceptionally well go back to China and have created unbelievable companies. We have hardly seen any of them do that in India. I mean, just
well,
look
that's a local ecosystem
that's
issue.
a local ecosystem issue.
In the
I
country.
agree. Okay. Do you have any comments on that?
No.
So what do we need to do? We need to change the tunnel vision in Hong Kong. But does that come from getting degrees, or is that just really more of a cultural thing? Should we just be teaching our kids to be more creative? You know, creative, because that will also help them not only perhaps create companies later on, but also just be better in their jobs as they, you know, look to solve problems within the corporation as well.
Yes. So the following are purely my personal opinions. So disclaim from, that's not from any authorities. So number one, I think our educational system needs to be changed. So when I look at my my son's textbooks, and also the way they got the examinations, they're still like 20 years ago when I was in my schools, my middle schools. Just, come on, it's already ChatGPT. My sons can use Siri to ask ChatGPT to produce some kind of essays and some answers to that, but the educational system doesn't adapt to that. So this is something that we definitely need to change, and the selection and the examination, the talent screening system is geared towards screening examining the best people who can actually answer questions and give what they sought correct answers. Actually, in real life, we all know that there's no correct answers in our life choices, right? So, but we're still in this methodology to teach our kids in this education system. And secondly, in our when they come to the universities, and Hong Kong are producing a lot of PhDs. The taxpayers pay a lot of money to give them scholarship and everything. Every year we have several thousand PhDs graduate from Hong Kong. Actually, they cannot land a job in academia but the whole system is still geared towards producing academia, right? Writing papers, top journals, and that's all like their KPIs. But they're not really, to some extent, is not anymore asking right questions or asking more questions and try to address them. So I think the whole education system needs some kind of change. And also, our ecosystem also does not provide a decent place, a buffer zone for these talents to stay. And I see this as also a very critical issue, because if I'm already a parent, right? So I will be very concerned if my son's getting a PhD in engineering in Hong Kong. What job he can get in here, right? I had some classmates or friends with a decent postgraduate degree from engineering, have to work for a real estate developer to sourcing, the building services equipment all over the world. But that's the sort of the best job he could land on. So this is not right. So the ecosystem needs to provide some kind of buffer zone to keep those talents and get them really to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hong Kong is getting there, at least on the funding side.
Yes,
the funding
working
side,
towards that.
We've developed sort of early stage fundings. There's a lot more actually funds out here like yours funding in the early startup space, and I'm glad to see that we're even at the other end. We have more ability for a lot more of these new economy companies to actually be able to list in Hong Kong. So thereby, recycling the capital and giving opportunities for, further investments. I think this conversation can go on for ages, and I'm a little bit upset with myself I didn't include some of you guys out in here, because I know you could contribute a huge amount to this conversation. You've had to listen to some extraordinary comments from our amazing panelists. So please join me in thanking them for their comments. Thank you. I was told time's up.
Oh, yes.
So.